So last weekend, after I finished preaching a sermon on money, I went to meet my wife and kids after church to have lunch at Gustavo's in Crestwood. They had been worshiping at the LaGrange campus, so we were meeting there to eat. And while we were eating, the manager of Gustavo's came over and he just said, "Hey, I wanted you to know that in the mornings, we play one of your sermons on the TVs as we're getting ready to open up the restaurant, and that way the staff and the servers can hear that while they're getting ready." And I said, "That's awesome." And I thanked him for listening. And when we were done eating, they brought us the check. And the way it works at Gustavo's is that you pay when you leave, right? The cash register is right there by the door, and you pay when you're walking out. That's what you're supposed to do. And so we get up and we leave. And right as we're leaving, some good friends of ours walk in the door. Now, I don't want to blame this whole thing on them necessarily, but they walked in right as we were leaving, right when I was getting ready to pay, and we talked for 4 or 5 minutes, and then we just walked out. We just left. And I went home and I dozed off on the couch before the playoff game, and I woke up, and like the minute I woke up, I'm like, I didn't pay my bill. And I just immediately was hit with the realization that I skipped out. My family of 6, 8, and I skipped out on the check. And I just had this scene unfolding in my mind where they all watched the preacher in the morning talk about money. And then he comes in to eat. Oh, there he is. We saw him today. I bet he's going to leave a good tip talking about generosity. And nope, it's a dine and dash is what happened. And so, I am just horrified. So I call the restaurant and I'm like, "Hey," and I tell him what I did, kind of confess my sin. And the guy who was talking to me said, "Yeah, we wondered what happened." So they talked about it, And then he said, I didn't think you did it on purpose. But the way he said it made it sound like he was the only one. Like, I didn't think you did. Everyone else did. Like, we debated this and took a vote, and I voted for you. I mean, the rest of them, they printed your picture off the security cameras. It's already taped to the door, but I believe in you. And so I felt horrible. He was great. He said, "Well, look, just next time you come in, you just pay then. You can just pay next time you come in." I'm like, "No, I'm paying now. I want to pay right now. I want to get this taken care of." And so I had my credit card and paid over the phone, left a big old tip for the server. I wanted to leave a big enough tip so that his story was not, "And they walked out without paying." His story was, "You wouldn't believe the tip I got." That's what I was going for, it was pure guilt. Like, it wasn't my love. It was just guilt, trying to cover my tracks a little bit. And so the moment I realized what happened, I knew I needed to take responsibility. And if I didn't take responsibility, I knew I'd be held accountable, right? So you can believe this or not, but I didn't do it on purpose. My intent wasn't malicious. I didn't walk into Gustavo's with this evil plan of, "Hey, baby," saying to my wife, "Hey, baby," not Gustavo. "Hey, baby, why don't we just get whatever we want? Let's all order soda and we'll get 2 quesos for the table. Let's just get whatever we want, and then we'll just steal. We'll just walk out without paying." I mean, that wasn't the evil plan. It just happened, right? Was I careless? Yeah, I was. Was I a little bit foolish? Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I wasn't especially mindful. But the moment I realized what happened, I knew I need to take responsibility now so that I won't be held responsible later. And in this series, that's what we're talking about. What do we need to take responsibility for now so we won't be held responsible later? And specifically, we are addressing how do we align our resources with God's priorities so that when Jesus returns, we'll be ready for that. The way we framed up this question last week, what do I need to do now so I can be ready then? What do I need to do now so that when Jesus returns, I'll be prepared then? And there's all kinds of ways that you could apply this question to your life. But specifically, what we see in Matthew 25 is the application of resources, of time and of money. So if you have your Bibles, turn back to Matthew 25. We looked at a parable there in that chapter last week, the parable of the 10 bridesmaids. This week, we're looking at a parable that is a little more familiar. It's usually referred to as the parable of the talents. And a talent was a measurement of money. So it's not that word isn't used in the way we would think of it now. It's a measurement of money, and 1 talent would be equal to about 20 years of labor, 20 years of wages for a day laborer. So the NIV translates it, instead of using the word talent, they use bags of gold, because that's, a talent would be, a measurement of money would be a bag of gold or a bag of silver. And so we're going to read about this master who leaves and gathers his servants together, and he entrusts the servants with his wealth, with these bags of gold. So starting in verse 14, Jesus says again, so kind of like the story I just told about the 10 bridesmaids, the story's like that. It's going to drive home a similar point. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. This was not an unusual scenario in those days, that a wealthy landowner would need to leave on some kind of a business trip, maybe take care of some other properties somewhere else, and they didn't know how long he would be gone. Travel was not dependable. Long-distance communication often was not possible. And so the servants would see the master leave, but they didn't know when the master would come back. They didn't know what the time frame was, when to expect him, so they had to always be ready. That sounds familiar. So he gathers his servants together before the trip, and verse 15 says, to one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another he gave 2 bags of gold, and to one he gave 1 bag of gold, each according to their ability, and then he went on his journey. And so he gives out this wealth. We said that 1 bag of gold was roughly equivalent to 20 years of wages for a day labor. So you could think in terms, this is very rough, but you could think in terms of 1 bag of gold being worth like $500,000, and 2 bags of gold being worth $1 million, and 5 bags of gold being worth $2.5 million. And so we're talking about a lot of money that the master is entrusting to his servants to take care of while he is gone. Now, when we read this parable, just kind of our Western culture mindset, we get hung up with this a little bit because it's not equal. It's not equal distribution. Right? Like, it doesn't seem fair. Why would one servant get 1 bag of gold and another servant get 5 bags of gold? And yet that's not really the point of the parable. But it's hard for us because, doesn't the Bible say that, all men are created equal? That's actually the Bill of Rights. That's not what the Bible says, but it does seem consistent with what we would expect to read in Scripture, that all men are created equal, and yet one person gets 1 bag, one person gets 5 bags, and it doesn't seem fair. And yet here's what we're gonna learn in this story is, it's not how much you have, it's what you do with what you have, right? Like, we wanna put the emphasis on how much, and we wanna compare to other people who have more. The emphasis of the story is not on how much you have, it's what you do with what you have that matters. Verse 19, after a long time, so the master's gone a long time. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. So they're entrusted with these large amounts of money. The master's gone a long time. So long, in fact, I imagine that the servants would have wondered if maybe he's not coming back at all. Perhaps as the days turned into years, the servants thought, if he hasn't come back by now, maybe he's not coming back at all. And if he's not coming back at all, then it's probably fine to just do whatever I want with this money. But just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't happen. Logically, we understand that. Just because he hasn't returned doesn't mean he won't return. And so a long time passes, but eventually the master returns. The day comes. Now, if you're a servant and you get word, he's back. Like, every day you've been looking and waiting and anticipating. You've known it's gonna happen. It's taken a lot longer than perhaps you thought it would, but now he's come. So how do you feel about that as a servant? Well, you're either gonna be excited or you're gonna be terrified, and it's all gonna depend on one thing. It's all gonna depend on if you are ready, if you're prepared. And so the man who had received 5 bags of gold brings to the master an extra 5 bags of gold. Master, he says, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. Here's 10 bags of gold. And the master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. Verse 22, the man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I've gained 2 more. Here's 4. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. So here's what I want you to catch is that both of these servants receive the same reward and they receive the same commendation. Right? One comes with 10, one comes with 4, but they're both told the same thing. Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful with a few things. You'll be responsible now for many things. Come and share in my celebration. Come and share in my happiness. So one comes with 10, one comes with 4, but their reward is the same. Why? Because they're not rewarded on how much they had. They're rewarded on how faithful they had been with what had been entrusted to them. It's not how much you have, it's what you do with what you have. Verse 24, then the man who had received 1 gold bag came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you've not sown and gathering where you've not scattered seed. So what's he doing here? I mean, before he even shows the master what he has, he's making excuses. And before he even presents the master with what his returns might be, he's already blaming the master. He says, well, look, if you weren't so unrealistic in your expectations, if you had perhaps been a little bit more fair at the beginning, right out of the gate, you gave me 1, you gave him 5. I felt devalued as soon as we started this. If you had maybe been more clear with your instructions, as soon as he talks to the master, he starts blaming other people. And I've just noticed that when it comes to managing our resources, this tends to be our default. Like we have this point of conviction where we realize we haven't been doing things the way that God would want us to do them. We haven't been responsible the way that he's called us to be responsible. But instead of taking responsibility, we do what this guy does. We blame others. We feel sorry for ourselves. We complain about our circumstances. We blame others. We feel sorry for ourselves. We complain about our circumstances. And so that's what he does. And then verse 25, he says, because all of these things, because of you, I was afraid. And so I went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here it is. Here's what belongs to you. All right, well, that's not that bad. Like I thought it was gonna be really bad. That he was gonna have wasted the money. He was gonna have, gambled it away. He was gonna have embezzled it and spent it on himself. He didn't lose it. He has it. It's kind of muddy. It's got some dirt still on there. He ran and dug it up. Here it is. But it's all there and it belongs to you. Well, okay, that doesn't seem like it's that bad. And yet, surprisingly, in the story, the master's furious. And so, verse 26, the master replied, you wicked and lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have at least put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more. Whoever has been responsible will be given more responsibility. Whoever has made the most of opportunities will be given more opportunity. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. And whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So it's pretty severe here. The weeping and gnashing of teeth is a reference to deep regret. Gnashing teeth is like the body's physical response to regret. When you look back on an opportunity that you missed, that's what you do. You think back and you think, if I would have only done this then, things would be so different for me now. And when you look back on that, you gnash your teeth. You kind of grind your teeth together. It's the physical response to regret. And Jesus says that's how it'll be. For those who aren't ready, those who aren't prepared, the master will return. And for those who didn't do what they needed to now to be ready then, that'll be the response. So just a couple of important things that I want us to underline as we talk about aligning our resources with God's priority. Number one, that God has generously entrusted you with his resources, so be grateful. if you look at verse 14, the master calls the servants together, and the Bible says that the master entrusted his wealth to the servants. His. And this word's really significant to understanding any kind of biblical principles of finance, because the word his demonstrates ownership. It says who the wealth belongs to. It's not the servant's wealth, it's the master's wealth. The master doesn't give the servants his wealth, the master entrusts his wealth to the servants. So it's ownership. And I would say that the issue of ownership is the issue, that really changes one way or the other how we understand and receive what the Bible teaches about money, right? Like, so when I talk about money, there are some people who are here, and you're glad for it. I know for some of you that's hard to believe, but yeah, there are some people here who are glad for it because they understand the ownership issue. They understand that everything belongs to God. They've understood this theological concept that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, and He's allowed us to use some things for a brief while we're here. And if that's your understanding of money, if that's your perspective on possessions, then you want to hear it. It's like, well, yeah, I've been entrusted with His wealth, and so I want to know how to use it in a way that He would want me to. But if that's not your perspective, right? Like if you come into it and you say, hey, my money is my money, it's my stuff, and it's my house, it's my car, it's my savings, it's mine. You can tell God to keep His hands out of my pocket, it's mine. Then you're not gonna like me very much, right? Like you're not gonna appreciate messages about money because you think it belongs to you. So really this issue of ownership, everything hinges on this idea, this theological understanding that everything belongs to God. When we understand that it all belongs to God, then we don't get so caught up in the comparisons. How much do I have compared to that person? Instead, we're grateful for what God entrusts to us. It's His, He can do whatever He wants with it. And so we're grateful because we understand He is entrusting what is His. Now the Bible says that gratitude overflows into generosity, that the test of gratitude is generosity. You wanna know if someone is a grateful, thankful person, you find out if they're generous. Because if someone is entitled, if someone is greedy, they're not generous. So the test of gratitude is generosity. And so that's how it works, that we understand it all belongs to God. Then we respond in gratitude because He's entrusted what is His to us. And then out of our gratitude flows generosity. And this is one of the reasons why when the Bible talks about a refusal to be generous or a refusal to give, it refers to it as stealing, which seems odd. It seems like such a strong term. Unless it belongs to God, then if it belongs to God, it's not just a failure to be generous, then it's stealing. Here's what I mean. Here's an example. Over the Christmas season, we had the Christmas Together event at church where for 7 nights we had thousands of people come from the community for this free event. And on maybe the 4th or 5th night, I was driving into our Christmas Together event, and one of our pastors on staff called and said that he had found out about this single mom with I think 3 kids, and she had been coming every night, and he had found out that they didn't have money. She didn't have money for Christmas presents for the kids that year, so she told them, hey, your Christmas present this year is just gonna be to come, it's gonna be to come to this event every night. It's gonna come every night. And so that's what she did. And of course, the pastor called me, was wanting to figure out, well, what can we do to help her so that she can have some presents to give to her kids? And I said, well, I'm almost there. I'm getting ready to pull in the parking lot. Let's get together and we'll figure this out. And I come in, I stop by my desk, and there's an envelope on my desk with my name on it. Inside the envelope is $175 with an anonymous note that says, Kyle, can you please give this to someone who God puts in your path that might be in need over this Christmas season? So it's just minutes later, and that never happens, by the way. That is extremely rare. Minutes later, God's provided, and then that money was on its way to her. So, that's that's the way it happened. But imagine if it would have happened differently, and we're just imagining here. Imagine I would have got that money and thought, $175? You know what? I need a drone. I need a drone. And I just kind of turn around and walk out the door and go to Best Buy and take the $175 and buy myself a drone instead of giving it as instructed. So if you heard that, would you say that would be a failure to be generous, or would you categorize that as stealing? Yeah, thank you, I know. Yeah, it's stealing. That's stealing. It's not just that I wasn't generous, I was stealing. Why is it stealing? Because it's not my money. It wasn't mine. I didn't have the freedom to just do whatever I wanted to with it or spend it on myself. It didn't belong to me. I was entrusted with it. And so to not do what I have been told to do with it is not just me failing to be generous, it's stealing. And so the ownership issue changes how we approach money and possessions. It allows us to be grateful. It allows us then to be generous. Richard Foster, who writes on spiritual disciplines, he puts it this way. He says, God's ownership of everything, this theological understanding that God owns everything, changes the kind of question we ask in giving. Rather than how much of my money should I give to God, we learn, doesn't come naturally, we learn to ask how much of God's money should I keep for myself? And so how you ask that question, the way you approach money, how much of my money should I give to God, or how much of God's money should I keep for myself, that changes everything. A second truth that I want to underline for us from this parable is that God will hold you accountable for his resources. So be intentional, right? Be obedient. The master talks to the guy with one bag of gold, and did you catch what he called him? He called him wicked and lazy. You wicked and lazy servant. When I read that, it jumped out at me because wicked and lazy are not, those words don't naturally go together, right? Like to parallel wicked with lazy, it just seems a little bit of a stretch. Lazy doesn't seem wicked. Lazy's like sitting in your recliner and you don't like what's on TV, but the remote control's clear across the room, and so you're not gonna get up and get that. You just watch whatever's on. And it's just lazy. It's like laying in the bathwater till you get wrinkles on your finger. It doesn't seem that bad, right? And so there's part of us when we read the story and we see the master's response, we want what the guy with one bag of gold did to be more severe than just, burying the treasure. Like if he would have embezzled it, if he would have gambled it, if he would have wasted it. In fact, one commentator pointed out that in early church history, someone rewrote this parable. And when they rewrote it, they added one line. And instead of having the guy with one bag of gold bury it in the ground, they said, and he squandered the wealth on harlots and flute players. I don't quite understand that combination either, but I guess those were bad things. We got to watch out for, flute playing harlots, especially watch out for them. But he added that line, like he spent all the money, squandered it away on harlots and flute players, and then you're like, okay, well, if he did that, and the master returns, and you expect the kind of response. And yet that's not the story Jesus told. In the story Jesus told, the guy, he buried the treasure in the ground. He didn't do anything. He didn't do anything. It's not how much you have, it's what you do with what you have. And he just buried it. And we get some idea of the kind of accountability that will be held to. It's not enough to just say, well, I didn't do anything wrong or evil, I just didn't do anything. And yet we've been entrusted with the resources, and God didn't trust us with those to bury it in the ground and then just wait for him to return. He wants us to use those, to leverage those, to invest those, so that when he returns, there'll be a return on the investment, a kingdom return. The guy with the one bag of gold, he didn't do anything with it. He buried that treasure because he was afraid. That's what he said to the master. I was afraid. I mean, what if I try and do something with it and it doesn't work out? What if I invest it and there's not a good return on the investment? Yeah, it's probably better just not to do anything at all. I'll just bury this. And then the master says, well, it's not just that you were afraid, you're lazy. Maybe you had good intentions, maybe you had these ideas of what you could do with it, but you didn't do anything with it. You just buried it and then sat around and waited for me to come back. And so the Bible tells us that we're going to be called to give an account of what we do with what we've been entrusted with. And as a pastor here at this church, I'll be honest, it scares me a little bit. Because God has blessed us as a church with some incredible resources, with some incredible opportunities. And I know there's a tendency for us to sometimes want to play it safe, kind of want to protect what we have, and we don't want to risk too much. And what if we try this and it doesn't work? Or if we try this and it fails? So let's just bury it in the ground. And there's a tendency to get distracted, to have good intentions, but to end up being kind of lazy. Say, well, look how far we've come. We just kind of sit back and enjoy it, and we'll wait for Jesus to return. And yet there's so much at stake. God has called us to intentionally invest the resources that he's trusted us with.